This head of broccoli is looking so fantastic in my opinion. And you can see it here with the shade and everything else. I'm gonna go ahead and get this one cut off. Look at that beauty. Guten gardening, everybody. Today, I wanna show you maybe the not so pretty side of gardening, or for some people, the not so pretty side of gardening. And I'm gonna demonstrate it using this beautiful head of broccoli that I just harvested. You see, a lot of times when we get our produce from the store, we know it's been washed. We don't think about the reality of gardening, which is that at all times, this is a very busy, very living world out here. And so there's lots of critters around everywhere. And you know, sometimes when you're gardening, that presence of critters is obvious. Like when we have a potato harvest or a sweet potato harvest, where the voles come to play and they eat up so much of what we're trying to grow. Well, that's one aspect of life, and that's a more obvious one, but you don't see that at the produce store because they're not sending you crops that have been destroyed by pests like voles. But when you start growing and gardening on your own, you start to see some of those pests that are maybe a little bit less obvious. And the reason I'm showing the broccoli today is because of what's underneath and what's inside of this. Now, this is a perfectly healthy head of broccoli. This is going to be incredibly delicious, but what I've heard is some people say once they see what I'm about to show you, that they want to give up eating vegetables, or they could never grow their own vegetables. And I'm going to tell you that seeing this is actually helpful. Knowing how to deal with it, that's definitely helpful. But I would argue that this is just a fact of life, and as a gardener, it's something that we get past, we move on from, and we understand that there's not going to be a problem from it. And what I'm talking about is that a lot of our vegetables come into contact with a lot of different little insects. Now, please understand that this broccoli is very healthy. It's going to be delicious. We're going to eat every bite of it. But as I look on the underside of here, and I look around just a little bit, I see, and I can only see some, but I see something in here that makes a lot of people squirm a little bit. And I'm gonna do my best to show you. Maybe you can see it moving around a little bit right there. Do you see the little tiny worm? It's right at the tip of my finger, and it crawled back up in there. And as I go through this, I can guarantee you there are several more at least. Now, we call that little critter the cabbage looper. Some people call it the inchworm. And you can actually see the little moth, we call it the cabbage moth, flying around, and it lays its eggs, and then you end up with these loopers on there, these little tiny worms. Now, we did a whole video on how to preserve broccoli. I am actually going to show you a part of, not necessarily that video, I'm going to do it myself again here in a second, but show you how to get those out of your vegetables. But that's not really the overall purpose of this video. I'm going to show you it right now, but then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the real purpose of this video. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to cut off all my little trees here and separate them out into pieces. And as I start cutting them back, you can start to see more and more. You see the bigger worms right down in there. You can start to see more and more of them in here. So if you don't do this step, you're going to end up with some of them in your broccoli. They're not going to hurt you or anything, but we want to get rid of them. I'm just going to take some cold water. And I don't really think there's an exact science to it. Some people use vinegar, some people use salt. You'll hear all different kinds of amounts, but I always just put a couple tablespoons of salt in the water, and all my broccoli goes right in the water. And this is not something that those worms are going to be able to handle. And I'm going to leave this in here for about 15 or 20 minutes or so and come back to it. But you should already be able to see what's starting to happen as our worms are starting to come out wherever they are, because they're not liking this one bit. Now, I've already taken the broccoli out, but you can see the worms that are left behind in here, all these loopers that came out of the broccoli. Now, there is something else I want you to keep in mind. I went through and I cut these into smaller pieces, the size that we would eat, and I rinsed them off. I rinsed all the salt off, and that gave me the opportunity to check, really closely, see if I could see anything else in here. And I did find, you can see them right down in here, just a couple more. They were dead, but they were still hanging in there. So while this process is highly effective, it doesn't mean you get every single thing out of here. But even if you're getting stuff, especially organic stuff from produce, I mean, that's just a likely reality anyway. And we're not willing to put any pesticides or anything like that onto our plants. So this is, again, something we have to deal with. But look at all that amazing broccoli. This is going to be really good for my family. So what I just showed you, all those critters moving around, is something that, again, if you go to the store, you shop from the store, you buy produce from the store, you typically don't have to deal with. And so for some people, that part of the process is unsettling. Knowing you can almost avoid the knowledge, you can deny the reality of growing vegetables, that there are going to be some of these critters around and you have to take care of them. You can just sort of avoid that reality if you don't grow your own food. What I'm going to tell you is, my main argument would be that the food that I'm growing, this broccoli that I showed you, that stuff is so good for you. It is so fresh. It is so healthy. It is so nutrient dense. It's a phenomenal vegetable, and I can take it from my garden directly inside, minimal time passing, and get some of the best possible nutrient results from that broccoli because I grew it at home. The only thing is, I have to accept the reality that there are going to be pests, there are going to be little critters out here, and I just have to take care of them, and I can't let that turn my stomach to eating vegetables. The purpose of this video is to acknowledge that fact, but also, especially if you're a beginner gardener, don't let that fact upset your stomach or cause you to stop growing. I'll give you another example of this. I love cabbage. You love cabbage? I hope you love cabbage. It's so good. You know, one of the critters that comes around with cabbage often, and there are ways to get around it, are little slugs, or maybe sometimes not so little. And so when you harvest a cabbage and you're pulling back all the leaves at the bottom, some of those first leaves, you might run into a couple of slugs here and there. That can't be the reason why you don't eat a really nice, fresh, healthy food or grow your own vegetables. I get it. We're all at different levels of being squeamish. We all have different thresholds for the things that gross us out. But that's just the reality of growing foods. And just because you see it doesn't mean it doesn't happen wherever all that other food you might be growing is coming from. So instead, what I would argue is, understand what you might run into with your various vegetables that you're growing, and then find a way to come to accept that fact and then deal with those critters so that you don't have to think about it after you've processed your food. And our kind of processing food, cutting it down, preparing it for freezing, is a whole different ballgame, and I would argue much better than a lot of that ultra processed food you're gonna get elsewhere. And we can control when it's grown, when it's harvested, what's put on it, and what goes into our bodies as a result. All right, this wasn't exactly a super long video, but I hope you understand my point in getting this across. And if you're a gardener now or a beginner gardener, you can let us know in the comments some of the things that you've had to get past, some of those, some of the things that caused you to have a little bit of an ick toward them, things that maybe you've gotten past, or if you're somebody who's given up on some fruit or vegetable because of the pest, let us know that too. I'm not judging anybody, I just want to get the point across. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.